This happened to me in Chicago a couple of years ago, and every time the memory notification pings my phone, I still feel the sterile chill of the hospital room in my bones. I'm not embellishing this for drama. I lived it, start to finish. I was propped up in a Northwestern Memorial Hospital bed, the plastic IV pole clacking softly when the elevator doors moaned open, and the visitor log on the little podium outside my room stayed heartbreakingly blank. My older sister Vanessa and my brother Mark refused to visit me, even after the nurse had called them and I'd texted that I might not make it through the night. The whiteboard at the foot of my bed still read, Goal, Pain, 4. But the real ache was the silence of family who had decided my suffering wasn't worth a ride into Streeterville. By the time the second bag of antibiotics drained, I'd already asked the social worker how to change beneficiaries from a hospital bed because the betrayal had landed like a fist on my ribs, and I knew exactly what revenge would look like: ink, paper, witnesses, and a stranger's name where my sisters used to be. If you genuinely enjoy our stories, please subscribe to the channel, tell us where you're from, and what time it is right now. It's always fascinating to know how far our story flows. The slow part of the story, the part where you understand why anyone would sign their $500,000 estate away to someone they'd only known a week, starts long before the beeping machines and the smell of chlorhexidine. It starts in a 2-flat in Avondale, back when the porch sagged under flower boxes our mom planted and we played tag between the maple trees. I'm the middle child, Elena, always the bridge, always the one translating between Mark's temper and Vanessa's glittering entitlement. When we were kids, I made peace with peanut butter sandwiches cut diagonally, and as adults, I kept making peace with far uglier slices, small loans until Friday, rides to O'Hare at 4 a.m., holiday dinners hosted entirely by me, while Vanessa forgot the dessert she was supposed to bring because her nails were drying. I own a tiny property management company, 3 condos in Logan Square that I bought with sweat and rental checks, and a stubborn refusal to buy shoes I couldn't afford. I handled leaks and locksmiths. I learned to read zoning notices. Each month, the spreadsheet I built in Google Sheets felt like a quilt of security I stitched for myself. It wasn't glamorous money, but by the time I hit 38, my net looked solid. A paid-off car, a healthy brokerage account, the condos with low mortgages, and a small IRA. My estate planner, Priya Desai, who I'd met years earlier in a continuing ed class at DePaul, helped me put it all in a neat binder: will, power of attorney, healthcare directive. Back then, when we drafted it, the beneficiaries were simple. If I died, split everything between Mark and Vanessa. Because that's what you do, right? You leave what you've built to blood. The cracks didn't appear as cracks at first. They looked like favors. Can you float me $500? Chase's bonus got delayed, Vanessa texted one January. She sent a selfie with Portland leather boots the same week, tagged at All Saints on Michigan Avenue. Emergency, Mark wrote in March. Truck needs new transmission. I'll pay you back with tax return. He didn't, of course, but he did post a photo of a Bulls game from the 100-level seats, the United Center crowd a sea of red under his grinning face. I kept track. I always keep track. You can call it petty or prepared. I call it being a woman who cannot afford to forget what she gives away. The ledger lived in my Google Drive, shared with no one, named something boring, Household Budget 2019. There was a tab labeled Family Loans, not because I expected repayment. Expectation is a luxury I learned to live without, but because numbers tell a story long before you say it out loud. Then last winter, the stomach pains began. A slow cramp at first, a tightness that felt like a fist closing. I ignored it for a week. We were midway through a kitchen rehab in the Logan unit, and my contractor needed decisions on tile, on grout, on whether to reposition the gas line. I kept sipping ginger tea, telling myself it was stress. One night, around 2 a.m., hunched on the floor of my bathroom in the soft, terrible light, I realized I was breathing like a woman in labor. Sweat, gooseflesh, a heave that emptied me. I called 911 when the pain sharpened into something primal. By dawn, I was in the ER at Northwestern, the nurse pressing a plastic thermometer under my tongue, the PA palpating my abdomen and murmuring something about rebound tenderness. The CT confirmed appendicitis. Simple enough, they said. Laparoscopic, in and out. It wasn't simple. The appendix had ruptured sometime in that night, and the infection dripped like poison ink into the places where doctors don't want to find it. They took me to surgery. I woke up to drains, to a fever that kept climbing, to the terrifying knowledge that even good hospitals in clean cities can fail to turn the worst tide. From that first night on the 10th floor, I texted both my siblings. "Hey, it's bad. They're admitting me. If you can swing by." Vanessa's bubble popped up and vanished. 3 hours later. "So sorry. Work is insane. Tomorrow?" Mark. "Damn. Hang in there. I'm slammed today. Maybe this weekend?" Maybe this weekend. The words still taste metallic. The social worker, a woman with kind eyes, the shade of brown you get in late October, stood at the foot of my bed and asked if I had someone to make decisions if I couldn't. "My brother and sister," I said, as if saying it could make it true. The second night, when the fever spiked and someone squeezed more ice into the plastic packs at my sides, Vanessa posted an Instagram story from a candlelit table at Maple and Ash. "You deserve it," the caption read, her face lit like a magazine ad, her wine glass full. I watched it twice, the way you re-examine an injury. I don't want you to think the decision to disinherit them was a tantrum. It wasn't impulsive. It happened the way a building comes down, one careful explosive at a time. The first charge was the silence. The second, the way Mark sent a group text asking me to cover a payment for his truck while you're lying around anyway. The third was the voice message Vanessa left my voicemail, accidentally I think, complaining to a friend that Elena loves being dramatic. She'll milk this for attention. The only person who came those first 3 days was a woman named Nia. She wasn't family. She wasn't a girlfriend, though for an hour I wished I could claim her as anything at all. Nia was a temp CNA, a travel nurse assistant assigned to my floor for a week, all lithe arms and a voice that could smooth rough water. She changed the chilled cloths on my forehead, brought me ice chips when the nurse was with a code 2 doors down, and, when I whimpered from a muscle cramp in my calf, she massaged it gently like we were two girlfriends on a couch instead of strangers in a sterile universe. She asked about my business because she saw the spreadsheet open on my tablet when I was lucid. She listened like numbers could be poetry. On the 4th day, when my fever finally dipped below 101 and I could speak without the sentence breaking apart, Nia propped the visitor log on her hip and said, "You want me to take it away so you don't have to see it?" The line was bare, no names, no times. I shook my head. "I want it there," I said. "I want to look at it." That afternoon, one of the internal medicine docs in navy scrubs and tired eyes told me I was lucky. "Infections like this," he said, "can get out of hand fast." He asked if I had someone to drive me home when the time came. I nodded and lied. When Nia wheeled in a mobile computer to check my chart, I asked, "Do you know the hospital notary?" She tilted her head, reading my face as if it were a chart too. "We have one. Why?" "I need to change some documents," I said, and my voice didn't tremble because the decision had solidified somewhere between my ribs and the IV port. "You sure you're up for that?" she asked. "You're still on some serious meds." "I'm up for it," I said. "I need witnesses, and I need a printer, and—" I swallowed. "Do you know an estate lawyer who will come to a hospital on short notice?" Nia stared at me for a long moment, then squeezed my hand once, like sealing a pact. "I know someone who knows someone, she said. "Let me make a couple calls." When she left, I opened my spreadsheet and added a new tab. Hosp stay receipts. Not for money, but for truth. I pasted. In the time-stamped text messages, the Instagram story I screen recorded, the call log. I listed the names of nurses who offered water and the names of family who offered excuses. It felt clinical and cruel and necessary. It felt like armor. Priya arrived the next afternoon like a cigarette burn in the sterile air, sharp, precise, a heat I recognized from 100 careful conversations about what if. She hugged me, careful of the IV line. "You're a menace for making me draft codicil's bedside," she said, but her eyes were soft. "I want to leave everything to someone who showed up," I said, and Nia, standing quietly near the door, blinked like someone had turned on a bright light. "Someone specific?" Priya asked. "Yes." I looked at Nia. "Her." Nia stepped back as if I'd shoved her. "Elena, no. No. You don't even know me." "I know exactly enough," I said. "I know you sat with me when I thought I was going to die. I know my sister didn't." Priya cleared her throat. "Legally," she said, "you can leave your estate to anyone you choose, but there are optics. Your siblings might contest. We can add a self-proving affidavit, strong witnesses, a no contest clause. We can document your capacity right now with a physician's note, and if this is about respect, we can build a trust that reflects your values instead of just handing over checks." "Do it," I said. "Pour over trust, no contest clause that makes even the thought of a challenge expensive, and change the beneficiaries where we can without probate, brokerage TOD, bank POD, IRA beneficiaries. We'll notarize everything and sign with the hospital notary and 2 nurses." Nia shook her head, tears bright and stubborn. "You don't have to do this for me." "I'm not doing it for you," I said, though of course I was. "I'm doing it because of who I am when people think I'm alone." Priya nodded like a conductor. "I'll draft," she said, already tapping notes into her iPad. "I also want a capacity statement. I'll page the attending." Before dinner, after they cut my antibiotics dose, the hospital notary arrived with a black leather book and a stamp that sounded like an axe kiss on wood. 2 nurses I didn't know, Melissa and Greg, stood at the foot of the bed and watched me sign my name with a firm hand that shook only after the pen left paper. Priya took a video with my consent. "Elena," she asked on camera, "do you understand what this will does?" "Yes," I said. "I'm not dying to spite anyone. I'm living to decide." The visitor log outside my door remained a blank white field, like a snowed-in street. The night nurse dimmed the lights. Somewhere down the hall, a monitor chirped, a sound like a tiny bird trapped in a screen. I slept. When my siblings finally texted with, "We'll pop by tomorrow," I wrote back, "Don't worry about it. I meant it." By then, the fuse had already traveled through the building's bones. The next morning, I asked Nia to slide the visitor log slightly so it would be the first thing anyone saw when they turned into my room. She did, then stood to the side when the elevator doors opened and Vanessa stepped out in a fur-lined parka, Mark in a hoodie, both of them complaining about parking, about traffic on Lakeshore Drive, about how cold the cafeteria coffee was. They breezed past the blank line of names and into my room like nothing had been missing. "Wow, you look," Vanessa started, then stopped, because I did not look like anything anyone wanted to see. "We're here now," she said, like words could erase days. "I need my keys," Mark said 10 minutes later. "Can I take the Subaru? My truck's still—" When they left after a whirlwind 20 minutes, Vanessa with the selfie she insisted on for her prayers up story, Mark with my car keys, Nia returned with Jell-O and a look that said she read people for their shadows. "I saw the way she angled the camera," Nia said softly. "So the machines were in the background." "So people would know she showed up," I said. "For 20 minutes. "What are you going to do when they find out?" she asked. I watched the visitor log sway on its little hook in the HVAC's breath. "I'm going to show them exactly what love costs," I said, "and exactly how much I can afford." That was the night the fever dropped like a curtain, and my brain sharpened into the engineer it becomes when there's a fire. By morning, Priya had filed the TOD and POD changes electronically where she could. She scheduled a follow-up for me at her office on LaSalle the week after my discharge. One more thing, she said, clicking her pen closed. You invited me into your spite today. Let me invite you into something gentler. We'll structure the trust so that if you step back from this later, if you reconcile, the door isn't welded shut. But it will stay locked to people who think a lock is a suggestion. I looked at Nia. Come to the signing at Priya's, I said. Please. Nia swallowed, then nodded once. Her palms pressed against the rails of my bed like she needed something solid. Okay, she said. If you're absolutely sure. Oh, I was sure. But revenge, I learned, is a long hallway of doors, and you don't know what you'll find until you open the next one. The first door had been ink. The next was the one marked family, where the hinges squealed like something old and disappointed when I shoved it wide and said, let's talk. And when I talk, I don't whisper. I didn't whisper at Gibson's on Rush, where I booked a table for 4 under my name a week after they discharged me. Me, Vanessa, Mark, and Nia. I didn't tell my siblings who Nia was. I just said, friend, and watched their faces flicker like a TV signal between politeness and confusion. The waiter set down steaks that bled onto porcelain like tiny civilized murders, and I took a breath that didn't hurt and said, I changed my will. Vanessa's knife paused mid-slice. I'm sorry? I changed everything, I said. TOD, pod, the will, new trust, no contest clause. It's all signed and notarized. Mark laughed, a rough sound. You're 39. You're not dying. This is dramatic. This is accurate, I said. I live in a world where an appendix can explode, and your sister can post a filtered prayers selfie from a hospital room she didn't visit. Excuse me? Vanessa said, brightness buzzing like a light about to shatter. I came. We came. Day 4, I said. After the crisis, after the code blew down the hall, after your maple and ash story. Nia's eyes flickered to me, a silent question. You want me here for this? I nodded. I wanted her there to see what a decision looks like when it grows teeth. You're making a mistake, Vanessa said, voice syrup, eyes knives. I was making a mistake, I said, for years. I mistook proximity for love. I mistook blood for duty. I mistook your can you float me texts for care. Mark leaned back, rolling his shoulders like a guy getting ready to throw a punch he swears he won't. So you left your money to who? To her? He chin-pointed at Nia, dismissive, ugly. I didn't blink. Yes. Nia flinched like the word had force. She opened her mouth, but I put my hand over hers under the table, a quick, fierce press. You don't have to explain your kindness, I whispered. Vanessa laughed, short and airless. This is rich. Elena, you're sick. You're on meds. This is, what did you call it, Chase? Undue influence. She pronounced the legal words like jewelry, like something she could wear to make herself smarter. Chase isn't here, I said. But since you brought up law, I filmed my statements for capacity. Hospital attending signed, notary stamped, 2 witnesses, no contest clause that's enforceable. If you contest and lose, you get nothing. Not even the small disbursement I left you to make the clause stick. Vanessa's gaze darted. What small disbursement? 5,000 each, I said, tired of pretending generosity was anything but a leash people expect you to pull yourself around with. It becomes 0 if you raise a challenge. You think $5,000 is going to keep me from contesting a $500,000 estate? Mark asked, scoffing. You think I won't lawyer up? I picked up my glass of water and watched the ice cubes kiss, a sound crisp as new bills. I think you'll lawyer up, I said. And I think your lawyer will advise you that I documented neglect. I have visitor logs. I have timestamps. I have texts calling me dramatic, and a nurse who will testify she saw me alone, shaking, while both of you chose to be busy elsewhere. And I think your lawyer will ask you to consider that the judge at the Daily Center sees this kind of greed every day and doesn't find it interesting. Nia stayed very still, the way a person might in a field where the grass hides snakes. Vanessa bared her teeth without smiling. I can't wait to tell Dad, she said. Tell him, I said. Tell him his middle child finally learned to honor herself. Dad will be disgusted, Mark said. Dad's been disgusted with me since I chose spreadsheets over being the default babysitter, I said. But Dad isn't my executor, and Dad doesn't decide how I direct the work of my life. The waiter arrived with a tray of sides, and we all made a theater of moving cutlery. Vanessa's hand trembled when she reached for the broccoli. I noticed because noticing is what saved me in the hospital. That tremble wasn't grief, it was calculation. Who are you? Vanessa asked Nia then, finally, as if addressing the person I had already made part of my will were an afterthought. A nurse? You prey on lonely patients? Is that your scam? Nia's lips parted on a breath that might have been fury if she weren't too careful to give my sister the spectacle she wanted. I refill water cups for people whose families don't, she said, and I shut up when shutting up is safer. So you're a saint, Mark said. Congrats. She's a woman who showed up, I said, and she'll be the one who shows up at Priya's office next week to receive the first trustee briefing. Vanessa's smile went porcelain. We'll see about that, she said, voice sweet and steady. We'll see about all of this. You will, I said, because I'll show you. I slid an envelope across the table. Inside were 4 glossy 4/6 prints. The empty visitor log, date and time visible, the Instagram story where Vanessa wrote, "You deserve it" over a steak, a screenshot of Mark's "while you're lying around anyway" text, and a still from Priya's capacity video, my face pale and fierce, my eyes clear. I brought receipts, I said softly. Vanessa didn't touch the photos. Mark did, flipping them like playing cards, his mouth flattening. You think this makes you look strong, he said. It makes you look lonely. I know exactly how I look, I said. I tapped the picture of the blank log, and I know exactly who left me that way. If anger could move furniture, the table would have slid into the wall. If denial could clean a conscience, Vanessa would have sparkled. Instead, we ate in tense silence, the kind where knives clink like tiny anvils. Outside, Rush Street glittered under winter light. People passed in coats that cost as much as rent. Taxis honked. Somewhere around the corner, a busker's sax wailed a song that sounded like a question you don't want to answer. When we stood, Mark tossed his linen napkin onto the steak juice, like he'd always meant to stain it. This isn't over, he said. It's exactly over, I said, and it only gets more over from here. Nia and I watched them stalk away, her expression unreadable, mine the brittle calm you learn only after you survive something that tried to unmake you. You should be careful, Nia said when they were gone. People don't like losing a thing they already counted. They didn't lose anything, I said. They never had it. But I know the sound of a fuse when it meets the next charge. It sizzles, it blackens, and it's bright enough to show every corner you'd hoped wouldn't be seen. The next burst wasn't theirs, it was mine, because the following Monday, when I walked into Priya's office at 100 North LaSalle for the trustee meeting that would begin putting my revenge on rails, I found someone already waiting in the lobby, in a suit that fit like a threat and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Ms. Alvarez, he said, mispronouncing my last name on purpose like a man testing fences. I'm Richard Feld, counsel for your father. There are moments where even the strongest plan feels suddenly like a house you built on shifting sand. Seeing my dad's lawyer, because of course Vanessa had called him, felt like a cold hand slipped under my shirt. He shook Nia's hand with limp politeness, then turned back to me. We're here to discuss your capacity at the time of the changes, he said smoothly, and to suggest a conversation about family harmony. In Chicago, even the word harmony can sound like a threat if you say it over the hum of an elevator heading toward a law office where documents can become weapons. I squared my shoulders, stepped forward, and said the only thing a woman who's just learned everyone has a lawyer can say. Then let's go upstairs, I said. I brought more than photographs. Then let's go upstairs, I said, and the four of us, me, Nia, Priya, and Richard Feld, rode in an elevator whose panel lit up like a string of small interrogations. The doors parted on the 15th floor to the scent of toner and carpet cleaner. Priya's office looked out at the Daly Plaza, where the Picasso stood like a dark question no one could answer the same way twice. Richard set his slim briefcase on the conference table and steepled his fingers. "I'll be direct," he said, which is what men say when they're about to talk in circles. "Your father is concerned about the rapid change in your testamentary intentions. He wonders if you had the capacity to—" "She had capacity," Priya said, voice crisp. Physician notarized, video recorded, 2 witnesses, a detailed memo of conversation, contemporaneously written and signed, and the changes were not radical in motive. They express her wish to benefit those who showed up for her when she was medically vulnerable. Richard spread his hands. "A stranger, who happens to be a hospital aide, seems an unusual primary beneficiary." "Stranger is a flexible word," I said. "My sister and brother qualified for it within 72 hours. His smile didn't move. "We're going to file a petition for temporary guardianship pending a full evaluation, along with a motion to enjoin any further asset transfers." Nia inhaled sharply. I reached for her hand under the table and found it, cool and steady. Priya didn't blink. "Temporary guardianship requires evidence of immediate risk or incapacity," she said. "You won't meet that standard. As for an injunction, the assets that could be retitled have been retitled. A pour-over will and revocable trust are perfectly lawful. File what you like, we'll respond." Richard clicked his briefcase closed like a gavel snap. "This is a family matter," he said, and there was the threat, soft and old and familiar. "It will look unseemly for all parties." "The thing about unseemly," I said, "is that it photographs beautifully. I'm not the one who curated an empty visitor log." He left with a polite nod that insulted the air. Priya walked him out, and when she returned, she stood by the window for a moment, watching a kid climb the base of the Picasso and slide down squealing. "They'll file," she said without turning. "They'll try to spook you. We'll meet them where they stand." "Where do they stand?" I asked. She turned back and looked at me the way you look at a client you respect enough to tell the whole truth. "At the bottom of a staircase they thought you'd always carry them up," she said, "and you just closed the railing." The petition landed 2 days later, stamped at the Circuit Court of Cook County, Probate Division, case number that meant nothing except beginnings, in re-estate and guardianship of Elena Alvarez. Emergency motion for temporary guardianship, supported by an affidavit from my father and a separate declaration signed by Vanessa that was long on concern and short on facts. It spoke of erratic decisions, of paranoia, of my sudden relationship with a non-professional hospital employee who ingratiated herself during a vulnerable moment. Mark's name floated at the bottom like an afterthought, a signature that bent into a scrawl, as if even his hand refused to follow directions. We sat at my kitchen table in Logan Square on a gray morning, papers spread like a toxic picnic. Nia poured coffee into my chipped Cubs mug and didn't comment on the way my hands shook when I lifted it. "I hate that this is happening because of me," she said. "It's happening because of me," I corrected, "because I finally set the cost of entry." Priya tapped the motion with a manicured nail. "They attached screenshots," she said. "Yours, Nia? Instagram posts of you with patients, quotes about showing up, your GoFundMe from 2 years ago when your mom had that stroke. They're trying to make a story about financial motive." Nia's mouth tightened. "I forgot that GoFundMe still floats around." "They forgot that I have a ledger," I said, "and that grief doesn't become a bribe when it isn't convenient for them." We filed our response with exhibits. Dr. Klein's letter on Northwestern Memorial letterhead, attesting to my capacity on the day of execution, the hospital notary acknowledgement, the video of me stating my intent with a lucidity that was almost rude. Priya appended the visitor log photo, time-stamped, the text messages, the phone records showing outbound calls to both siblings unanswered for hours. We filed a motion for fees if the court found the petition frivolous. We did not bluff. The hearing was set for the following Thursday at the Daly Center, 50 West Washington, courtroom 1806. If you've never stood under that Picasso on a weak, cold morning, you can't understand how it feels, like you're walking into a building that eats stories and spits out files. I wore a navy dress and the boots I bought after my first condo closed. Good leather, mostly paid for in pride. Nia wore a gray blazer that softened the line of her shoulders. Priya was all sleek competence, her tote bag a traveling armory. "Look at me," Priya said in the elevator, voice low. "You don't speak unless the judge asks you a question or I nod, okay? We prepared your statement, but this is probate. He might not want to hear you at all. If he does, keep it factual. Don't perform." "Truth is the only performance I'm good at," I said, though my heart drummed a nervous cadence that sounded like the footfalls on the long marble hallway. Judge Morales looked like someone's kind aunt and someone else's sworn enemy. She wore her robes like they were just another sweater. We took our seats. On the other side of the aisle, Richard glowed in navy. Vanessa sat with her hands clasped like a communion portrait. Mark slouched, my father's jaw clenched so hard you could mill flour between his teeth. Richard rose with an ingratiating smile. "Your Honor, we're here on an emergency petition for temporary guardianship. Our concern is simple. Ms. Alvarez recently underwent significant medical trauma. In the 7 days immediately following, she executed a radically altered estate plan, substituting as primary beneficiary a woman she met in the hospital. We have grave concerns about undue influence and capacity. A short-term guardianship would simply maintain the status quo while we investigate." Priya stood. "Your Honor, there is no status quo to maintain. Ms. Alvarez is not incapacitated. She is not a minor. She is not developmentally disabled. She is not in need of guardianship under 755 ILCS 511A3. She executed documents with capacity, witnessed, notarized, and documented. Petitioners filed this without any medical evidence, relying on innuendo and family. Displeasure. We ask that you deny the petition and award fees." The judge's gaze slid to me, then to Nia, then back to Richard. "What medical evidence do you have, Shorra?" she asked. Richard spread his hands. "Your Honor, we have the nature of the surgery, the medications administered, and the unusual speed with which she altered her testamentary intentions." "That's not medical evidence," the judge said. "That's narrative." Richard pivoted. "Then allow me to call Ms. Vanessa Carr to testify regarding her sister's behavior." Vanessa walked to the stand like a woman approaching a camera, shoulders back, mouth arranged. She swore, sat, and looked at me like she longed to either embrace or erase me. "My sister is a generous person," she said, and her voice carried the sweet. "But she can be impulsive and dramatic. After her surgery, she sent texts that didn't make sense. She became fixated on the idea that we didn't love her because we couldn't make it in right away. She accused us of abandoning her. It's just not normal." "Did you visit her at the hospital?" Richard asked. "Yes," she said quickly. "When?" I don't recall the exact day." "Before or after she executed the documents?" She hesitated, and in the pause years of being photographed instead of being seen, collapsed into something smaller. "After," she said. "Thank you. No further questions." Priya stood. "Ms. Carr, do you recognize this?" She held up a photo on letter-size paper, the visitor log, blank lines, the date visible. Vanessa's smile didn't crack, but it strained. "I don't know." "And this?" Priya tapped another sheet, a screen capture of Vanessa's Maple and Ash post, date and time in the corner. "This was posted the night your sister's fever spiked to 102.7, correct?" "Lots of people post later," Vanessa said too quickly. "Indeed," Priya said mildly. "Shall we subpoena the metadata from Instagram? Or can we stipulate to the timestamp being accurate? Richard rose. Objection. Harassment. Sustained, the judge said, then added, but I'll want to see the hospital visitor log. Priya nodded, as if she'd expected nothing else. No further questions. Mark testified after, sullen as a storm cloud. He said I'd always been rigid, that I liked control, that I held money over people's heads. He said Naya cozied up to me. Priya showed him a printout of his "while you're lying around anyway" text. He squinted, confirmed it, then muttered, I meant lying around, as in, in the hospital. The judge looked at him for a long moment that ripened into silence until he drooped back into his chair like a plant realizing it had never been watered. Priya called Dr. Klein. He testified briefly that I'd been oriented to person, place, time, and situation, that my fever had dropped, that my pain meds had been lowered that morning, that, in his words, Ms. Alvarez was lucid, decisive, and insistent her choices be recorded with clarity. Finally, Priya asked if the court would hear from me. Judge Morales cocked her head. Briefly, she said, facts. I walked to the stand and told the simplest story of my life, that the IV pole clicked, that the visitor log sat blank, that a woman named Nia slipped ice chips between my lips and rubbed my calf when it cramped, that I have a ledger in my phone labeled not with anyone's shame, but with my own reminders of how often I had swapped my time for their comfort. I said, I did not change my will because I hate my family. I changed it because I finally understood I wasn't theirs to neglect. Thank you, the judge said, when Priya finished with our short direct. I don't need cross. Richard rose anyway. Ms. Alvarez, he said, are you aware that the beneficiary you chose stands to gain roughly $500,000? I am aware, I said, and turned my head and looked at Nia, who held my gaze with the steadiness of a level. And I am aware exactly how much a glass of water costs when you're thirsty. When it was over, the judge leaned forward. I'm denying the petition, she said. There is no evidence, none, of incapacity. There is evidence of resentment masquerading as concern, which this court does not entertain under the guise of emergency. As to the request for injunction, there is no basis. The respondent is a competent adult who executed estate planning documents with appropriate formalities. Petitioners are admonished that any further filings of this character may result in sanctions. Respondent's motion for fees will be granted in part. Mr. Feld, you may confer with Ms. Desai and submit a proposed order. A sound issued from my father then, something between a scoff and a swallowed groan. Vanessa's hand went to his sleeve. Mark stared at the floor like it might offer him a hole to slide through. I'd braced myself for victory to feel like fireworks. Instead, it was the exhale of a building that hadn't fallen. Outside, the Picasso threw a long shadow over the plaza. We stood in it, the way you might stand in a shade you've earned. Nia gripped my hand, then let it go. Priya slid the signed order into her tote like a queen, sliding a letter into a drawer that locked when it closed. Next? Nia asked softly. Next, I said, we live. Living looked like lamplight on a new couch I bought, with money that had never been earmarked for anybody's emergency. It looked like a locksmith changing the deadbolt on the Logan unit after Mark forgot to return my spare, and my neighbor texted that he'd seen someone jiggling my doorknob at 2 a.m. Living looked like the email from Richard 2 weeks later, couched and courteous, confirming that his clients would not be appealing the denial of guardianship and that they would, with regret, decline to pursue further relief at this time. It looked like a cashier's check mailed to Priya's office 2 months after for the portion of my attorney's fees the judge awarded. The memo line said simply, per order. The handwriting didn't look like my father's or Richard's. I decided not to know. And living perversely looked like revenge, because I did not waste what had been returned to me. I met Northwestern's philanthropy liaison in a quiet conference room off the Feinberg Pavilion, the same building where I'd stared at a blank line and remade my life with a pen. The liaison was a practical woman with a haircut that said she didn't waste haircuts. We talked numbers and naming rights. I told her I didn't want my name on a wing. I wanted blankets that warmed. I wanted a small fund that kept a cell phone on during a long recovery. I wanted human things that make a body a person. We wrote the trust's first check to seed the Quiet Room Fund, a small grant program administered by social work to cover the ridiculous gap between policy and need. An Uber for someone with no one to drive them, a care package for a patient with no family, a few hours of a sitter so a neighbor could go home and sleep. I asked Nia if she'd consult on how to make it useful. She looked at me like I'd handed her a locket with a photo inside, and it was her mother's face. "You're sure?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "I want what saved me to be available to someone who isn't me." Word got out because that's what words do in a city that feeds on them. Block Club Chicago did a tiny piece. Someone at WGN called and asked if I would come on and talk about my remarkable bequest to a stranger. I said no, mostly because I wasn't dying yet, and also because the word bequest tasted like eulogy. I was interested in what happened while I was living. Vanessa and Mark did not show up at the informal reception the hospital held for donors, though I knew they knew. My aunt had texted me screenshots of Vanessa's private comments, little barbed sentences like safety pins buried in rice. My father never called. Our contact narrowed to legal letters and a birthday card addressed in my mother's old looping script, which he had found in a drawer and used to make himself feel righteous. I set it on the mantel and looked at it until the feeling passed, then slid it into a file labeled Family Correspondence and left it there like a museum piece. Something I did not expect happened in spring. Kindness begets witnesses. Nia's supervisor, who had seen the gossip swirl, pulled her into his office, asked if she had accepted an inappropriate gift from a patient. Nia slid across the table the trust documents with Priya's redacted letters and said, voice steady, that she had done nothing but pour cups of water and hold a hand. He cleared his throat, apologized, and asked if she'd like to interview. For the CNA supervisor role, she did. She got it. On her first day, she texted me a photo of her badge, the new title A Small Crown. My chest went warm and wide. Spring in Chicago is a rumor until it isn't. The river goes from iron to glass. The magnolias on Logan Boulevard explode like someone whispered yes into branches. I stood on my balcony one night with a cheap beer and watched a couple walk their small dog who was so proud to exist he lifted his feet too high, and I wondered what it took for me to get here. It turned out the answer was a blank line and the will to fill it with something that wasn't an apology. I ran into Vanessa outside the Armitage Brown Line stop in May, the kind of collision fate likes because it looks accidental. She was in a dress that belonged to a magazine. Her eyes were ringed with makeup that belonged to battle. For a second, we just looked at each other, two women in a city that could fit our entire childhood between two train stops. "Elena," she said, and the syllables fell between us and broke. Do you have a minute?" Usually a minute is all it takes for old cracks to widen, but I had learned to measure time by different instruments. I nodded. We stepped into a doorway that smelled faintly of espresso and cinnamon. She held her clutch under her arm like a shield. "You won," she said without preamble. "You did what you wanted." "I did what I needed," I said. She laughed, a tiny tired sound. Do you hate me?" "I don't have that much energy," I said. "I used to. I used it all on making us okay." I watched the way her eyes flicked, calculating angles that no longer existed. "What do you need, Vanessa?" She swallowed. For a second, she looked very much like our mother did when she'd realized the rent had climbed again and her paycheck hadn't. "I need you not to tell people," she blurted, "about the visitor log, about Maple and Ash. People talk." "I didn't tell anyone," I said. "They saw." She flinched. None of it was intentional. I was scared. Hospitals scare me. "I was scared," I said softly. But I was there anyway. Her chin lifted the way it did when she was 13 and wanted the last word. Dad says you're cruel. Dad taught me to call a ledger, I said. And he taught me that if you count something, it matters. I counted. She took a breath that shook. If I apologize, does anything change? Yes, I said. Her eyes brightened, just a flash. You? I added. You change. I watched the brightness drain and felt horrible and honest at the same time. This isn't a door I can reopen. It's a door I bricked shut with everything I survived. She stared, then tilted her head and studied me like I was someone new she hadn't decided how to price. You left your estate to a stranger, she said finally. Do you hear how insane that is? I left it. To the person who wasn't a stranger when I needed a person, I said. Sometimes family is the stranger. The train thundered overhead then, so close we had to stop talking. When the noise thinned, Vanessa looked down at her heels like they'd betrayed her and said, Congratulations on whatever the opposite of a fairy tale is. She turned and walked away without looking back. The wind lifted a piece of hair off her neck like a hand. I stood there another minute until the barista from the coffee shop smiled at me apologetically and pulled the door shut to lock up. The glass reflected me with my hair wild, my eyes clear, my mouth not smiling and not frowning, but something more durable. A line you step over. There were smaller reckonings. Mark tried to Venmo request me $400 for tickets, with a note that said, Remember you said you'd help? I declined and sent a screenshot of my new household budget sheet with a line item labeled Boundaries, $0. He replied with a middle finger emoji, then another request for $5,000 titled Legal. I ignored it. A month later, I saw on Facebook that his truck had been repossessed. People posted small, mean jokes. I didn't join. I didn't need to. The universe was working on its own, the way gravity does. Priya finalized the trust administration protocols with Nia as successor trustee for anything that might need hands before probate one day. We met on a sun-bright afternoon at Printers Row Starbucks and went over disbursement triggers. I watched Nia read the corner case sections, lips moving slightly, as if she were trying them on to see if they fit. You're thorough, she said. It's what saved me, I answered. What saved you, she said, and closed the binder. Was you deciding nobody else got to define love here? On the 1-year anniversary of the night my appendix decided to go catastrophic, I walked into the hospital with a stack of handwritten notes folded like small planes. I sat in the quiet room and handed them to the social worker and said, When someone has no visitors and you feel the ache in your throat because you can't be in 2 places at once, give them one. Each note said some version of what I needed to hear. You're not crazy. You're not being dramatic. You're in a body that hurts, and the world is big and impersonal, but not everything in it is. As I left, I passed a new visitor log on a hook. A name was scrawled there in a messy heart. Another line below it was blank, but I didn't hate the blank anymore. I knew it would fill, or maybe it wouldn't. Either way, someone would drink water. Someone would rest. Someone would know that a stranger can step into a space blood refuses to occupy and make it less terrible by inches. People think revenge is a fire or a scandal, a headline or a handcuff. Sometimes revenge is a notary stamp. Sometimes it's a small fund that buys the ride home. Sometimes it's a life you live without asking anyone to clap. My siblings still exist in this city. We orbit without colliding. If they ever decide to visit me, they'll find a front door with a lock I chose and a room with no space for apology performances. They'll find a ledger on the shelf and a couch where I sit with my feet up and a story that doesn't require their approval to be true. Every now and then, my phone flashes a memory from that week, and I see the visitor log again, white and waiting, and then I see the pen in my hand, and I remember that the first signature I put on my new life was mine. The most chilling part isn't that they refused to show up. It's how easy it was for me, once I stopped begging, to shut the door they left open and to discover the silence on the other side, was finally mine. The end.